Welcome to JGTCR, I'm Cope, and today we are tuning the A112 Abarth. Let's get into it. There is no doubt about it, this vehicle is not very fast. However, that does not make it bad. And for such an old car, it handles rather well. And it could even be said that the suspension is somewhat sporty. We can make considerably aggressive moves in steering without too much negative consequences. As we start pushing harder, we find that the front has enough grip, but the tail likes to step out when we get over speed. Realistically, there is barely enough power to spin the wheels, so we really need to wring the neck out of this engine to keep it going. Third gear is where the action is at for the most part when tackling corners, with fourth gear helping us out with the longer sweeping turns. Understanding where gears max out is important for driving fast, as shifting gears at the exact right time is imperative to keep the momentum going. The brakes work well, and to be honest, I was expecting more dilemma under braking, but it is very reasonable. If we're being honest though, there is not much braking needed to slow down. Only mild touches are needed here and there for the most part, unless slowing down from a very high speed. Let's collect our time. (9 minutes 56.5 seconds). Let's look at the race tune. With a touch more than 3.5 times the power, this A112 Abarth does travel a bit faster, and thanks to our supporting modifications, there are no issues getting that power to the ground. Looking at the tune sheet, what we have done is rather mild. Our body height adjustment is lower at the front than it is at the rear, and our natural frequency is softer at the front than it is at the rear. Both of these modifications are intended to stop the nose from lifting when we accelerate, causing torque steer or understeer. Our anti-roll bars were set to 8 points both front and rear. This is to reduce some wobbliness we were experiencing while cornering, in particular when switching directions. The rest of our setup is relatively par for the course, so let's get back out on the Nürburgring and see how it performs. This A112 has had itself an extreme makeover. It is night and day from what it was to what it is, and many would say it is a completely different vehicle. There is a decent amount of power to be had, and it does wheel spin, but it's not detrimental to the drive feel or our overall time. The handling is rock steady, and steering is crisp, but bumps and curbs can easily destabilize the car. This means as long as we keep it on the black stuff, all will be well. The power delivery does feel lazy when it's off boost, however the gearing is set to minimize the wheel spin, but there's still plenty to be found if we look hard enough. When we do keep it on boost, it's more than happy to sing us the song of its people and has plenty of pull to get us through the rev range. The brakes, which we definitely need now, are great for the application and pull up quickly when we use them. Let's collect our time. 7 minutes 10.7 seconds. It's engine swap time. The A112 in factory trim with just the engine swap is a bit of a joke to drive. It may as well be an automatic because the way to drive it is to put it in fifth and use the throttle. Even when doing this, there is constant wheel spin. We can be at top speed in a dead straight line and it will just keep wheel spinning. The torque steer from all the power trying to make its way to the road does make taking turns quite difficult. The only answer available to us is to take turns cautiously and use a lot of throttle modulation. After the engine swap, the suspension has suddenly become very wobbly and spongy. This is a very clear indication that the weight balance of the vehicle has been thrown out. In this rendition of the A112, the brakes are really put to the test. Fortunately, they are decent, however, it can take a longer time to slow down due to the extra weight and excess speed. Let's collect our time. 8 minutes 32.3 seconds. On to the race tune. With much more power available to play with, we had to be a touch more aggressive when tuning the A112 with the engine swap. However, the story does remain the same. The body height adjustment is lower at the front than the rear, and the natural frequency is softer at the front than at the rear. Our differential settings have been adjusted to 10 points across the board. This is to reduce wheel spin and torque steer. Our downforce settings were cranked up to help us stay pinned to the ground. But the VIP of this build is the ballast of 70 points at a ballast positioning of -25. This extra weight over the front wheels reduces wheel spin and helps us with steering while cornering. Let's test it out on track. When completely modified and tuned, this A112 Abarth is obviously much faster. With our top speed adjusted to 370, we have more top end. However, we have also reduced our wheel spin. That's not to say there isn't plenty to go around, there's just less of it. The copious amounts of wheel spin we do still experience needs to be managed with careful throttle modulation. If we are careless, the torque steer can pull us off track, especially if we stay stuck into the throttle. A good rule of thumb is to use 50% of the throttle or less when cornering and up to 100% when we are on straights. As we become more acquainted with how the A112 handles, we can venture further up to 60 to 75% throttle, which is closer to the verge of braking traction when cornering. The additional weight over the front wheels is a massive help, but it can be a fine line between usable and unusable. This is subjective based on driver and driver style, so it may take some tinkering to find what works best for you. Increasing the weight will improve our traction under load, however, it will also increase our likelihood to understeer. While reducing the weight makes it less likely to understeer, but more likely to torque steer. So have a play with the ballast and find what works best for you. Let's jump ahead and collect our time. 6 minutes 54.2 seconds. Quite the improvement indeed. The A112 comes from humble beginnings. In factory trim it is not very fast, but it is a decent handling package from its day. When completely modified and tuned, it springs to life with more than 3 times the power and the handling to match. When engine swapped, it becomes difficult to manage as the suspension gets sloppy and spongy. But when completely modified and tuned with the engine swap, it becomes a little monster, terrorizing everything in its sight on the track. The transformation the A112 goes through is phenomenal and well worth experiencing. And that's all we have for you today, so until next time, keep racing!